All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Atlanta History Center. We are so happy that you are here for tonight's author event with Sandra Gutierrez. She will be talking about her incredible, and I need almost two hands for this cookbook because it's so impressive, her incredible cookbook, Latinissimo. It is recipes from all 21 countries of Latin America. It's clocking in at about 550 pages, so it'll keep you cooking, I think, for many, many years. So I'm very excited for Sandra to be with us here tonight talking about it. Now, if you don't yet have your copy of the book, they are for sale outside. We have both the English and Spanish editions, so whichever one suits your preference, we have available for sale. They are 25% off tonight only, and Sandra would be more than happy to sign them for you after the event. If you already have your pre-purchase copy, she's also happy to sign those for you after tonight's conversation. One note, if everyone doesn't mind just taking out your cell phone really quick or checking your smartwatches, just making sure that everything's set to silent. We are making a recording of tonight's conversations. We just appreciate that to make sure that we have an uninterrupted conversation this evening.
I'm so happy and proud for you.
Lastly, if you have questions after Sandra and Virginia are done with their part of the conversation, I will bring around the mic. I know we're a smaller group in a smaller room tonight, but that will just, please use the mic. It just helps to make sure everyone in the room can hear the question and helps make sure that the question ends up on the recording as well. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce tonight's guest, and then we will get talking. Sandra Gutierrez, tonight's featured author, is a journalist, food writer, and historian. She's a professional cooking instructor, and on top of all of that, she's the author of 4 cookbooks. She's considered one of the top national experts on Latin American foodways and on the southern regional cuisine of the U.S. You can find her work and the food exhibit at Smithsonian Museum of American History. She lives in Cary, North Carolina, and has been awarded the La Dame Escoffier MFK Fisher Grand Prize Award for Excellence in Food Writing, amongst many other accolades. We're so happy she's coming back to Atlanta History Center. She was here for her last book shortly before the pandemic, so we're happy that she's back in Atlanta tonight. She will be in conversation with Georgia-born and French-trained chef Virginia Willis. She, of course, is also the author of many cookbooks, James Beard Award-winning cookbook author, including Fresh Start, Secrets of the Southern Table, Lighten Up Y'all, Bon Appetit, Basic to Brilliant Y'all, and many others. So you are in for a real treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Gutierrez and Virginia Willis.
Thank you, Claire.
Hey, y'all, thank you so much for coming tonight. We've been talking in the back, and so we just thought we'd bring our conversation out here. I am so proud and happy of this woman, and have y'all seen her incredible, beautiful book? It's so amazing. I am immensely honored to be here and interviewing you.
You all must know we're very good friends.
We've known
many years.
We've known each other forever. Yeah. all the things. So, but we're not here just to talk about the two of us and our friendship. What I asked Sandra to do to start to sort of ground us in what we're going in our conversation, so that we can have a great conversation about her incredible encyclopedic tome of a book, is would you please read a little bit from the introduction?
That'd be great. I would be honored.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's a heavy book.
It's a heavy book. It's a big one.
I believe it's 4 pounds.
Wow.
That's some shipping, man.
I know. Thank you all for being here tonight. I often say that Latin American food is like a large house. The front door is Mexican food because it is the most recognized of all Latin American cuisines. It welcomes cooks with familiar dishes like enchiladas, moles, and tacos. Yes, Mexican food is great. I love it too, and I cook it often. However, step further into the house, and there are 20 other kitchens inside. Each one is as delicious as the next, and each one is different from the rest. Join me as we walk across the threshold. I have so much to share with you, and the 300 plus recipes you hold in your hands are only the beginning of what you will find in the homes and on the stovetops of cooks from the 21 countries that make up Latin America. This book is a collection of recipes from home cooks who, like you and me, have to decide what is for dinner when the family is hungry or time is short. Cooks who spend their days at work keeping homes and children, and yet put food on the table and gather communally to break bread or tortillas or arepas together each and every day. I have tried my best to represent each country in this book because each has its own flavors, its own culinary roots, its own cultural amalgamations that have shaped the foods eaten there, and because each cuisine is as delectable, exciting, and vibrant as all the others. First, a caveat. As you read and cook throughout this book, keep in mind that I have only touched on the smallest fraction of the recipes found across Latin America. You see, Latin food is like a horn of plenty, a never-ending parade of dishes, regional twists and recipes, and generational renditions that have evolved from a base history but continue to change as you read these words today. Culinary knowledge is power. It destroys stereotypes, helps to build understanding, makes the unknown relatable, and opens borders. Cookbooks preserve cultures and build peace and understanding between strangers. By using this cookbook, you can help me desegregate Latin cuisines and open them up for the rest of the world. I want to dare you to feel comfortable finding the differences between each cuisine, not just the similarities. Because as Latin Americans, we celebrate diversity. Each of our foods is as different from the other as is our music, our histories, our language, our stories, and of course, our countries. We are all one people, but we come from many. We are all Latin Americans, but we're not the same. That's how we want it. Argentinian food remains distinct from Peruvian food. Cuban specialties are unlike those from Mexico. Nicaraguan dishes are dissimilar from those in Chile. Belizeans, Colombians, and Brazilians all use coconut in their dishes, but each cuisine is still distinct and has its own characteristics. In a world where sameness seems to be a goal, Latin Americans still celebrate individuality. That, friends, is to truly love diversity. It's not to destroy differences, but to accept and celebrate them, and to build bridges between us that can ultimately form a colorful, multicultural, and equitable quilt of humanity, a true melting pot, not by making us all the same, but by giving us all, different as we may be, equal rights, respect, and value.
Incredible. And so this isn't just a book of incredible recipes. I mean, the stories that you tell in your writing are poetic and true and real and a part of what we need in this world today. On that, to that, I remember you telling me years ago that when you first moved to North Carolina, like, people had these perceptions of you in the South. They automatically thought that you were involved in some way in farm working.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's not the case. Will you explain that a little bit to our friends here?
Yes, when my husband and I first moved to North Carolina in 1985, we were among the first Latinos in North Carolina, believe it or not. We took a little detour through Canada and returned to North Carolina in 1994, and we moved to this town called Cary, which is on the outskirts of Raleigh. And again, we were the first Latinos to move. When our neighbors heard that we were moving to the house, they complained in the country club that they shouldn't let us in because we perhaps were Colombian drug dealers, because how else could we afford to live in that neighborhood? Then the question was, are you a maid, or do you work in agriculture? And very interestingly, my husband's sitting in the back of the room. You'll all meet him later. I married a blonde and blue-eyed Guatemalan. So when we would go to parties, people would assume that he did not understand a lot of the things that they were saying, in other languages. And he could, because when you know Spanish, you can understand. Or they would ask him, what kind of construction work do you do? So it was all very stereotypical. And we took it upon ourselves to not get offended, but take it as a challenge to educate our neighbors first. So I made a lot of open houses, I made a lot of parties, and introduced people to who we were. My husband's a graduate of Duke University. I went to college in the States. We're educated people. Yes, there are many Latinos who come here in very dire circumstances. We are not among them. We're among the blessed who have So therefore, we think it's our responsibility to make sure that we break as many stereotypes that can open the doorway for the second and third generation Latin Americans who are coming, who have the same opportunities that all of you have and will do wonderful things in their life here. And we have 2 children, and now we have 2 grandchildren. And as a woman with 2 granddaughters, that was also important to me, that you see us as more than just a stereotype, that you see us as a collection of people from different races, different colors, different perspectives, different political views, and different food ways. And that to me became the goal, to start teaching people and breaking down barriers and start making people less afraid, because I think that a lot of prejudice is fear of the unknown. And so making people less afraid and doing it in such a way that is loving and that is not anger, it's not anger driven. And by bringing people together, I've discovered that food is indeed a catalyst that brings people to conversation. And so I grew up in a house where a grandmother would get us together for lunch every Sunday. And on one side of the table was my super right-wing grandfather, and on the other side of the table was my super progressive leftist grandfather. And us kids, there were many of us, were used to hearing these huge discussions of politics and everything at the table. And there was a point where my grandmother would say, okay, it's time for dessert. And our 2 grandparents would get their cigars and would go out and play with us. And there was never a fight. They loved each other. They respected each other. So I never understood why, when I came here, people were so polarized and couldn't discuss differences. Mm-hmm. And so around that dinner table, around a place where you share food, which is one of the most intimate things you can do with one another, right, other than making love to someone, it's the place where we can at least come together and share something and respect the space that we're in. And so we can talk to each other instead of at each other, or shouting up. I'm trying to silence the other side and start conversations. And that's what matters to me, that we just start conversations. We don't have to agree. We can agree to disagree, but let's talk. Let's start sharing and exploring. And part of it is food. Start eating the way your neighbors eat. And Latin Americans, if we continue the way we are going, will be one of the largest minorities in this country in 10 years. So your kids will go to school and have a lot of these dishes and learn to eat and learn about your future neighbors through food. That's basically what we learned from that experience. And luckily, we haven't moved house. We're still there 30 years later.
Not the Colombian drug dealer.
No. They talk to us now.
But you became a farmer.
Yeah, I did become a farmer.
Yeah,
I did become a farmer.
This is true. So no, but I think that's a, I mean, I remember you telling me that years ago, and I thought, wow, just that was how you were met. Your parents were, your mother was an economist, your father was an oral surgeon, but the automatic assumption, being in not rural, in an educated, wealthy part of the country, yes, and you're moving into a country club neighborhood, right?
Yes.
So it's like just that to being faced with that. And I might add that not only did she attend college in the United States, she went to Smith, right? So little Julia Child action amongst others there. So you, in the introduction, you speak of Mexico being the front door, and it really is literally a geographic sort of front door on our South. I love that analogy, and also just like the door opening and the generosity of it. Will you speak to that, like how you use that as sort of like the entree into these other cultures?
Yes, thank you, Virginia. It's again trying to bring you all to a point of familiarity, to a point that's not scary. Because when you think of Latin American food, you might think that it's exotic or the other people's food. And it really isn't. It's not that different. But yeah. And when you look at Mexican cuisine, it's so rich. It's so rich in regionalities and variations and ingredients. But each one of the Latin countries has the same difference in regionalities and food traditions and history and amalgamations of people that came together for each territory that complete the cuisines of each country, that I wanted it to be an easy introduction, so that after eating a taco, maybe you would go and try a cannelloni from Argentina, because it's shaped the same, except one's made with a crepe and the other one's made with a tortilla. You know, that after you read a few of the chapters, you discover that not everybody in Latin America eats tortillas. That if you go to Chile and you ask for a taco there, or in Argentina, you might get slapped. Not a taco, fajita in Chile or in Argentina, you would get slapped because that means girdle. And so that means like you're asking, can I have your girdle, please? You know? And taco in South America means the heel of your shoe. So even though we all speak the same Spanish, we don't have the same language or the same words for everything we say. So even in that sense, we're different. But Mexico offers you that first step where you can, everybody by now has eaten an enchilada, a burrito, and a taco. I think those are universal as pizza.
Yeah,
right,
no,
Italian
sure.
food. So once you cross that leap of faith, let's put it that way, I am asking you to make little leaps. I'm not asking you to make the leap from Mexico all the way down to Brazil. I'm asking you to start discovering neighboring countries one by one until you are comfortable with the similarities, but are even more comfortable with the differences.
I think that's the thing that's so wonderful too, which reading about the history of Latin American cuisine, and that there are actually many dishes that aren't that unfamiliar to Western European descendants, right? Because there were many Europeans that either colonized or
settled,
or immigrated and settled into Central and South America. Will you share a brief history? I know there's 21 countries. We're not here for a college grade class, but a brief history of the history of South American cuisine, so that we can have a greater understanding.
Sure, I have a very small chapter, I think it's 4 pages long, on the history of Latin American foodways, but this is how it starts. At the beginning, one side of the world had no idea what the other side was eating. And that's how it was. And so when Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovers America, which was here with a lot of incredible civilizations, it is a gastronomic tsunami. That's what happens. That's what occurs. And I say the world started moving round and round and hasn't stopped since, because the colonizers bring with them citrus, rice, pork, beef. These are things that you eat on an everyday basis, right? Garlic, cilantro. Cilantro is not Mexican. It comes from the Middle East. The Spaniards bring it. And then, of course, they find here that the Americas have tomatoes, avocados, cocoa, cacao. We have duck. We had the turkey. Thanksgiving turkey is Mexican. Not the Thanksgiving turkey, but the turkey itself. And we had all these yuca and potatoes, all these things that the world ended up depending on, and of course corn, which is the backbone of Latin American ingredients. But then there is another vein, what I call the African vein, which is extremely important to the cuisines of Latin America, and curiously enough to the cuisines of the South. This is the only territory in the entire world where the same 3 cultures collided to create and affect foodways, which is why it's
through slavery, effectively through
slavery. So the Africans are brought and they're enslaved and they're brought forcefully to this part of the world. And no, they didn't come with food with them. They didn't have beans in their ears. Those are all lores, and that's whitewashed history. But the people who brought them brought ingredients with them that they had already discovered in Africa, and also that they knew that their enslaved people would eat, because
that was their food.
That was what they ate. But what happened once all the 3 cultures meet here is that for the Spaniards and the Portuguese, they're called the Iberians because they're in the Iberian Peninsula, and they are the ones responsible for colonizing Latin America, different from the Brits here in the United States and the French. And what they did is they thought it was important for people to start mixing racially. And so they started propitiating intermarriages very, very quickly. And our food was doing the same thing. And so those three cultures collide on the plates from the very beginning of the colonial period, which is what we call the period of the conquerors in Latin America. And they, to this day, are the three strongest cultural influences in the cuisine of each and every single Latin American country. So when you look just at the vastness of Latin America, and you look at the history of food in the South, and you're able to already see that the three same cultures impacted all of this area at the same time, you can already find a point of familiarity. That's the first one. But then, when Ellis Island is getting, floods of immigrants, it's because Europe is starving. Europe was starving. That's the time of the famine, and the Irish were starving, even though, funnily enough, potatoes were feeding them before that came from the Americas. But they were starving because they only planted one kind of potato. They didn't go and plant different kinds of potatoes. So when blight hit that potato,
it wiped it out.
It wiped it out. They didn't have any other varieties. So that's why that happened. But when the Irish start coming, and the Italians who were eating polenta, corn from the Americas, which was supposed to be only animal food, because they're starving, start coming to Ellis Island, they also start coming in bigger numbers to Latin America. And different groups of the same cultures that are descending in the United States, the Germans, the British, the Italians, the Scots, the Irish, all of these groups also start making homes in Latin America. And depending on what area they were finding more commonalities to their area, or where they were finding work, or where they were finding safety, that's where they settled. So that is why Italians fall in love with Argentina, because the terroir there reminds them of the land in Argentina where they could plant olives and they could have grapes for wine.
They went where they were comfortable.
Where they knew, where they felt familiar.
Felt similar, yeah.
And in the meantime, the Latin American countries had just become independent. In 1821 is where the independence started happening. And these independent countries, of course, now they're 20, they're no longer regions, because the Spaniards had this really big region, I don't remember, the Reino, I don't remember what it's called, but it was Mexico and all Central America, and that was one government itself. Now it divides into all of these countries, right? All of a sudden, these countries are also vulnerable to getting conquered by their neighboring countries. And so they offer visas and land parcels and opportunities for people from the other side of the world to come and do what they called making the Americas, or building the Americas, and building countries so that they would also build a government and independent places instead of continuing this warmongering between countries. So that's what happens. But on top of it, you have a lot of Chinese people who come at the same time that they're coming to California to build railroads. They're going to Peru, and they're going to Mexico, and they're doing the same kind of work there, and they're making settlements in these areas. And in the 1940s, during, and even before the 40s, during the colonial times, many of the Sephardic Jews start coming and escaping from the Spaniards, actually, who were having an inquisition in Spain, and they start moving to the Americas. But in the 1940s and after World War II, they really come. Now you have Ashkenazi and Sephardic and all, Orthodox Jews descending on Latin America, different places. South America was the first place that they went. And at the same time, you have Germans escaping, some of them escaping the war, and others escaping justice. So you had a lot of Nazis that descended in Chile and in Bolivia, and there's a lot of history, but they bring food with them. The Japanese also make a big impact, not only in Peru, but you find them all through the coasts of Latin America. Guatemala has a big Japanese influence in the cuisine too, and so on and so forth. And so you start seeing the world melting together in Latin America, and melting in a way that didn't happen here. Because down there, because interracial marriages were not looked down upon, we started mixing it. We're mestizos, we're criollos, we're indigenous people. That's part of who we are.
So are you saying it wasn't as segregated?
It wasn't segregated. They started desegregating it very, very quickly, because they didn't feel that it was easy to control people who were in different groups. It was, they felt it was going to be easier to teach their religion, which is the reason that they came to colonize, also the excuse that they used. The reason really was they wanted to control the market of sugar and silver, and they wanted to make money and become superpowers. That was the real reason. But they used religion as one of their excuses or justifications for the horrors they were doing. And even though I'm telling you all of this and it sounds negative, I want to stress that like in the South, like in the United States, these countries were formed with a lot of pain, a lot of blood, a lot of strife. But if we stay negative and only look at history as something negative, we forget that those of us who are here aren't responsible for what those people did back then. And we forget to see the silver lining. And to me, the silver lining in history is our food. Mm-hmm. That is the silver lining. I am not a depressive person. I'm always trying to find the positive. Just to give you an example, I literally broke my neck writing this book, and was paralyzed and was told I was never going to walk a couple of years ago. And I said, no, that's not going to happen because I don't believe that. And I started looking at the positive things and started moving and starting to learn how to write with my hands until I finally got to walking, and now I'm back to normal. My poor husband is in trouble because now I can catch him. But you know, that is the same way I look at history. History is full of horrors. Mm-hmm. Today, our world is full of horrors. But what are we going to teach our children? To feel afraid and angry forever, or to look with hope to the future so that they can make a difference and build upon the positivity? And that is how I look at food waste. Mm-hmm. I see it as a way in which we came together as different peoples of different colors and different religions and different ideas of different parts of the world, and built something that belongs to all of us.
It's incredible to think about, like, the same sort of immigration that happened, and you know, we know that there's like a huge now Asian American population in San Francisco. Well, the same thing has happened in South America or Central America, et cetera. So how in the hell did you corral 21 nations of food into this book? Because it's not, there's almost more dissimilarities than there are similarities. So how did you, I mean, I know that you've been dreaming and wanting this book for years and years. And I know it's been in your brain and, you know, rolling around the washing machine of your brain. But 300 recipes is still an epic tome. But how did you narrow it, 21 cultures down to 300 recipes?
Believe it or not, my original recipe list, these are not the recipes that are developed. The list of recipes were 9,000. You could never write a book that's 9,000 recipes. It would be bigger than this table, okay? But I needed to have that recipe list so that when I talk to publishers, mm-hmm. I could tell them I really know what I'm talking about. And you don't. Because every time I would go to publishers,
that's easy with a publisher.
Yeah, they would say, well, of course we want a Mexican book, another tacos book. How many tacos books was I offered? I don't know, 12? And I said, no, I don't want to write the tacos book. I want to write the Latin American cookbook. From that 9,000, when I really started looking seriously after talking to several publishers, I narrowed it down to like 2,000 recipes. And that's when I started meeting publishers in New York City with my agent. And I went and had these meetings one-on-one with them. And they were still like, this is so huge. How can we divide it? When Knopf, my publisher, and I started conversations, the list of recipes that they got from me were about 2,000 recipes. And so my editor said, we can't do that. And I said, of course we can't. So how do you want to narrow it down? And I said, we have different avenues. We can go by country. Mm-hmm. But if you only want 250 or 300 recipes, we're looking at 20 recipes per country maximum, not even that, 15 recipes per country. That doesn't really represent a country. We can look at historical periods, the colonial period, the Republican period, the ancient period. Again, that's very limiting to a period of time, and that's not what modern cooks are doing today. So I said, let's do it by ingredient. Mm-hmm. Because what ingredients helps you do is build, if you thread a number of ingredients together, you're able to sew the different patchwork and make a quilt that's united by the similarities, and yet each square remains its own different part. So that is how the idea of narrowing down the recipes. but I got away with more than what you think. There's 357 recipes in the book, but there are over 400 variations. So if you read the notes and you go down to the nitty-gritty in the book, you will find that because you find the recipe for, I'm trying to think, carne mechada from Venezuela, which is a shredded beef, not untypical to your cochinita pibil, which you're most familiar with, but different ingredients, of course, but it's that shredded meat, the shredded brisket that everybody's eating now, the birria that everybody's eating now in their tacos. So the Venezuelan version, by switching just a few ingredients, you can make it into a Cuban ropa vieja. And so that is how you can see where the similarities are and yet how different the two plates end up being. And why is it that both countries have this tradition of shredded beef? And why is it that Mexico has it with pork? And why is it that you find a shredded dish everywhere in Latin America? That kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so that became a subset. And I have a tremendously brave and kind and generous editor. His name is Tom Pold at Knopf, who said, "You're the expert. So let's try to get as many as, I don't care the final number. Let's just make sure it fits into the size of the book. But you're the expert. Let's make sure that it's as complete as possible with as few recipes as we can get in."
So each recipe, it's divided by ingredient, which is genius. And I love that you chose that path because it is just this unwieldy beast of countries and recipes and regions within the countries and history and all of that. And so it's like, okay, corn or okay, fish. You know, I mean, it's not just like what we would consider typical. So was that structure like a light bulb moment for you to create that? Like okay, this is how to grasp this monstrosity.
Yeah, there was a publisher I met in New York once who said to me, "If you're looking at this project, what does it look like?" And I said, "It looks like Post-its on the wall all over the place." And he said, "Oh, it looks like Beautiful Life," I think it's called, the movie with the genius.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, "There's going to be a point where some of those Post-its will begin to disappear and your book is going to take shape."
Oh,
that
nice.
was the moment that was
the
for
moment.
me.
That was the light bulb moment. So each recipe indicates the country of origin. How many would overlap? Like, I mean, is there for example, I don't know, corn, just because, corn salad from Chile that's very similar to a corn salad from Peru, or would they automatically be wildly different, like a corn salad from, I don't know, say Georgia versus the Pacific Northwest? I mean,
both. Like
right.
the two foods that we have in common throughout Latin America, and you will not see many recipes in this book, are tamales, which are dumplings, really, that are wrapped in some kind of leaf. And you find them under different names: humitas, humintas, hallacas, bollos, different depending on what country you're in, and different ingredients that comprise them. And empanadas, which are the handheld pies. Empanadas are a result of the Spaniards. They came with that tradition already from Europe. And the tamales are native to our indigenous people in the Americas. So again, you find two very different things, but everything else is very different. I will say that about 30 to 40% of the recipes occur in various countries, because neighboring countries, depending on the region that you're in, when the two countries are next to each other, those two regions that are colliding, or the towns that are colliding with each other, even though in different countries, they have similar recipes. And yet there are some, like, I want to find one that's really weird for you. There's a meat in Venezuela that has disappeared from the Venezuelan menus because of the political situation now, that people cannot afford the same ingredients, or the ingredients simply are not there. And it's the beef tenderloin cooked in a chocolate sauce. A chocolate sauce, what makes you think of what?
Mole.
Mole, right? A mole couldn't be more dissimilar than this sauce that they're using in Venezuela. And cacao was greatly grown, and still greatly grown in South America. So cacao is also from the region of Venezuela. So a mole has nuts and fruit and tomatoes and chiles in it. And of course it has, the one mole, poblano, has chocolate. All the other moles don't have chocolate. But then in Venezuela, this starts with the beef tenderloin getting seared and caramelized in unrefined sugar, which we call papelón or piloncillo, panela. And then the chocolate sauce is built on top of that, and it's not bitter, it's not sweet, it's just chocolate.
I want that.
It's like an umami sauce.
I would like one of those, please.
And you make it in about 25 minutes. So it's nothing that takes forever. A mole would take forever. Now my mole just takes a few minutes because I studied the mole recipe very deeply with Diana Kennedy. She and I were friends and we discussed it. I taught her recipe many times. And that mole takes 4 days to make. And I said, no one has time for this. So most Mexican cooks are using jarred mole, which you will find here in your supermarkets. You just add water or broth and mix it together, and that's what they use. Well, I thought there's got to be something in the middle. So I created a recipe for a mole for every day that you make in your blender, and you make it in 20 minutes. And you don't have fruits in it, you have molasses, because that gives the same sweetness and fruitiness that raisins or plums would give to a mole, and so on and so forth, and you can make it every day of the week. And Mexicans who tried it could not believe that it was not a traditional mole. Because if there's
You know
one
what you're
word-
doing.
I know what I'm doing, but because one of the words that you will not see in my book once, don't Google, maybe once, I don't know, is the word authentic. Because what is really authentic? I hate that word. Moist and authentic are the two words that in cooking we try to stay away from.
Moist doesn't bother
Moist
me.
and authentic are the two words that I can't take in cooking. But because when I studied for these recipes, these are not my recipes. I didn't get them out of my head, and I've been researching Latin American foodways for 30 years.
So let me ask you on that. Like the 9,000 in the beginning that you whittled down to 2,000, that you whittled down to 300. Had you tasted all of those recipes before you started testing them?
Okay, so the tasting part has been a matter of 30 years of
Right.
trying and tasting and researching and traveling and living in Latin America for 13 years made that very easy. I didn't taste or test all of them. Like I said, I had a list of recipes that came from my studies, and my studies included visiting libraries and universities and finding the books that were first written in 15 something, and the first recetarios, or literally notebooks from housewives and grandmas that you could find, some of them dating 200-300 years back, and then reading every possible modern day Latin American cookbook that they have printed. But on top of it, I went back and read Spanish books and Italian cookbooks and to see what the influence had been in those countries that I could tie into what was happening in Latin America. So this book has taken 30 years of research and over 5 years of writing to put together. So what I did with the recipes, though, is that the week after, so my husband and I were supposed to go to a 23-city
Right.
trip, okay? And the week before we were supposed to leave, the pandemic started and the world shut down. And I had meetings and I had appointments and I had interviews and I had restaurants and I had all these things that I had to do, and everything stopped for me. And I thought, how am I going to do this book at this point? That was before recipe testing. It was the last leg of my research before I was going to start and making the food and deciding which recipes to put in my book. And a friend of mine from Panama, Elena Hernandez, you've met her through IACP, she said, I have this idea. I have this chef. Chefs are going nuts. They don't have any restaurants. They're bored. He's willing to teach one recipe, whatever recipe you want, and then invite a few of the cooks to watch, and you could interview all of the cooks that day. And that became the model for many of my interviews. Zoom opened up the world for me, and I actually ended up interviewing and meeting hundreds of more people than I would have if I had to go to a city and drive from one place to the other to meet someone at the same time. So his recipe, the sancocho de domingo, which is from Panama, is a very simple pot of chicken soup. And it is made by sauteing onion and garlic with culantro, which is the long leaf cilantro. It's not cilantro with a little leaf. It is a different herb completely. That one is from the Americas. Cilantro is from the Middle East. And the beauty of culantro is that not only does it have an uber taste, like really potent, but it also does not turn black when you cook it. So it stays in a very vibrant green color, and then you add the chicken and you just sweat it. You're not making it turn golden. You're not sauteing it so that it gets color. You're just sweating it, and then you add your chicken broth to it and cover it. And at the end of the cooking period, you will add real African yam, which we know as ñame in Latin America, which here in the South, people think it's sweet potato or white sweet potato. It's a completely, ñames are huge, and sometimes they're hairy, and they're a root, they're a tuber, and it's so delicate. It's like a very watery potato. And so one of the things that I did was ask cooks, how are yours different? And one of them said, my grandmother taught me to grate the ñame and add half of it at the beginning and then add the rest later, so that the first half would absolutely disintegrate and become creamy. And so our sancocho is creamy, is like a chowder. Another one said, oh no, forget it. My
grandmother did this.
My grandmother would chop it
Your
into
grandmother
chunks.
was wrong.
Exactly. Chopped it into chunks and added it at the end so that the cubes would stay whole and it tastes more like potato, and so on and so forth. And that is where I realized authentic recipes don't exist, because you could have two cooks in the same town living next to each other, and one of them would make a sancocho de domingo one way and the next one would make a sancocho de domingo with a different twist, and who is to say that hers is not as authentic as hers? And I went through that test with every one of the recipes I included in the book.
So how did you choose? So of the 21 countries, are there basically a fairly equal amount?
Yes,
You tried to be egalitarian that way.
I tried to make it as equal as I could. If I didn't do it in the recipe per se, I would do it in the variations,
right,
because I had all of those variations
right,
to work with. But I started, I think, with the best way in which I found I started my testing, and therefore that was the beginning of the book, was starting with the basic flavorings of every country, which is how you find that the similarities per country. And the first recipe that came with the Spaniards that became the base for our cuisines in Latin America was sofrito. And sofrito was a mixture of onions and oil only, called sofregit in ancient Catalan language. And you go back to the Livre de Saint-Sauvy from, I believe it's the 1200s or 1300s, and you find the recipe for sofrito there. What happens when sofrito gets to the Americas? Well, Cubans start adding anato, or achiote, which you've all been eating, by the way, if you've ever had macaroni and cheese, which I know in the South you've had macaroni and cheese, or cheddar cheese, because cheddar cheese is actually white, and what makes it orange is anato, or achiote. And Cubans add achiote, and they add other herbs and cumin, which of course comes from the Europeans that they bring it. But if you go to Puerto Rico, and we have your beautiful recipe, Ana Raquel, of your sofrito from it's this lady's recipe, the color is completely different. It's green, and that is because it's made with recao, or the long culantro, and it changes the color and the flavor completely, but the base is still onion and oil. And if you go to Central America, you see the addition of tomatoes and the addition of sweet peppers. And if you go to Mexico, you'll see the addition of dark peppers, of hot peppers and dried peppers, and so on and so forth. So when you go to the chapter of basics, I say, if you only made a pot of rice and a pot of bean and seasoned each one with each different base, you would taste the difference in each country. It's the easiest way to do it. So that is how I try to make it as equal as possible between countries.
It's really incredible, and I love the part about sofrito, because I think that does make so much sense. Like in French cuisine, we'd call it a mirepoix, but in Latin cooking, it's not just a mirepoix. There's just many variations of that. So let's talk about corn, because I think that corn is so incredibly important. And I remember reading, and I wrote it here, that Mexico has made it illegal to grow GMO corn on Mexican soil. And in 2020, Mexico expanded the prohibition with a decree banning all GMO corn, including exports, as of January 2024. So no GMO corn into Mexico.
And that's happening.
That's a line in the sand.
And that's a fight that's happening throughout Latin America.
Right.
Guatemala's fighting it too. I know that Chileans are actually quite advanced with their project to also outlaw GMOs. Corn is the backbone of the cuisines of the Americas. It is the one ingredient that we all have in common. You'll find it no matter where you're eating. Even when Brazilians do not eat corn with as much frequency as Mexicans, they call it milo. They do use it in their cuisine. So corn is everywhere in Latin America. Heirloom corn, which is what Virginia is talking about, is the new types of corn that we're finding in our markets that were really here also in the South. Flint corn, all the yellow corn, white corn, blue corn, all the traditional heirloom corns that are now coming back that people like me are planting in our gardens to bring them back, and which are very different from the deliciously sweet corn that is the hybrid made in the United States. The way that we use corn in Latin America transformed the way people ate and survived in very dire moments around the world. Corn fed the world, and it still feeds the world. And as much maligned as corn syrup is, and these things are, that's your hybrid corn. That's not the corn that we're talking about, the good, healthy heirloom corns. But think of it this way. When the Europeans arrived to the Americas, they automatically assume, we go back to the stereotypes that my husband and I face, that they are conquering, ignorant, stupid, inferior human beings, right? Natives. Oh, they don't wear clothes like us, they don't have jewels, they must be idiots. But when you look at the fact that we wouldn't have the 365-day calendar without the Mayans, we wouldn't have the number 0 without them, we wouldn't have terraced agriculture without the Incas, and a lot of other advances. That's just food, right, that we're talking about. The world would have starved if they had taken corn by its face value and just eaten it like that. And in fact, the first Europeans who took corn back with them to Europe died on the way or were very sick with a disease called pellagra, because they were just boiling the corn or roasting the corn and eating it straight. And heirloom corn is different. It hasn't been hybridized. It needed to be, first of all, pollinated between a male plant and a female plant. That's still true today. So that took somebody intelligent to realize that there was a male corn plant and a female corn plant. But then it needed to grow in a way, it needed to be transformed chemically in a way that the body could absorb niacin. Because if you don't absorb niacin, you can absorb protein, you can absorb a lot of other things in your body, and so you starve. And that's what happened to the Spaniards. They didn't pay attention to the fact that all through the Americas, our indigenous people were nixtamalizing corn. The term nixtamalize is when you soak your corn in calcium hydroxide, remove the pericarp or the outside of the corn, and that allows the niacin to come through. The Spaniards were not doing that. So when they took corn, that is why most European countries started giving corn only to animals, because people were getting so sick, and pellagra is a horrible disease.
Yeah, it was very present in the South too.
Very, very, yeah, exactly. Yeah. We had it here until they learned to nixtamalize. And you've all eaten nixtamalized corn and heirloom corn if you've had grits. It's the same thing. It's just the way we treat them that are different, the way we pre-treat, or the way that we grind it, that's different. But it's the same corn.
So how did you make the choice, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll open it up for some questions here. It's home cooking.
Yes.
It's regular recipes for moms and dads and families, and it's home cooking. So it's sort of a two-parter, and I know it's a big question, but home cooking, and yet you say in the beginning that not much in the way of celebration foods, because that's a whole other genre.
Correct.
So it's not restaurant, it's home cooking, and it's also not celebration. So can you sort of wrap things up with addressing why you've chosen recipes for home cooks?
So home cooking is comfort food. And I think we're at a time in the world where we're all yearning for comfort food, to be soothed, to be loved. Food is the only medium that we have that can bring somebody who has died or is no longer with us back to us. When you taste that bowl of rice that tastes exactly like the one your aunt made or your grandmother made, they're back with you. And they're back with you in an intimate, deep, personal moment. So for me, home cooking was the medium, again, to bring you to a place where you're not scared to try new cuisines, to a place where you will also find some sort of comfort, to a place where you will find similarities between the things that you eat now here and the things that you will find in Latin America, so that if you're used to eating an Italian minestrone, you will find an Argentinian menestra and find the similarities in both things and say, it's not that different. Or if you're used to having, let's say, your collard greens, for instance, that we have here in the South, you will actually not find it very rare to have a pie that's stuffed with kale and cheese and eggs. Or the collard greens that the Brazilians have, that is sauteed, that I have in the book as well. That you will find these foods that you can identify with, that are different from the ones you know, but that will also feed your soul. And I think that only home cooking can do that. I don't think restaurants have achieved that unless they are restaurants that specialize in home cooking. And it's not a fusion either, which I find that a lot of the Latin American young generations of writers and chefs are creating their own fusion cooking, which is meant to shock the palate. Oh, let's add soy sauce with chocolate and raisins and see what happens. And if that works, we'll put it on top of a piece of chicken and add some edamame things. And they're making all these weird
$39.99.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you're going to taste is the organic fusion of cultures that happen in a good place, which were the inside of people's homes.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. I'm so excited to have been talking with you tonight. We could just keep talking, but I bet that there's some folks here that would love to ask Sandra questions. And if you don't ask us questions, then we'll ask you questions.
Yes.
Does anybody have a question?
Start us off.
Yes, please.
Hey, how you doing? Andrew Bernadine, chef of Atlanta. So my question was, what was the hardest country to understand?
That's a very good question. The hardest country for me to understand was Paraguay. It's a landlocked country. There are only 2 landlocked countries in Latin America that don't have any coastline, and it's Paraguay and Uruguay. Paraguay still has a very large indigenous people and they have very different languages that are still used in their foodways today. And so that was the most mysterious to me. And I loved disintegrating and breaking it apart and seeing which were those recipes that we could be more familiar with to start delving into that cuisine. I will tell you that if I could write 21 cookbooks, I would write 21 cookbooks the size of that book, and I would still only touch the top of the iceberg of what's in Latin America. And that's what makes it so fascinating and what made it so hard to limit myself in the scope of the work. Mm-hmm. But Paraguay was the hardest one for me.
Anybody else? Thank you.
I'm very interested. You emphasize the 21 countries, but at the same time, the boundaries of countries are very artificial. And cuisines don't respect those boundaries. So how did you sort of delineate, or how did you mush it, I hate to use that word, into countries when cuisine really didn't respect those boundaries?
That's a great question. I have to disagree with you. Cuisine in Latin America does respect the boundaries. Where it meshes together is where I said where countries come together and then the similarities start happening. But as you move further and further from the borders, you start seeing very dissimilar cuisines, which is why in Argentina you will find that the part that collides with, let's talk about Peru and Chile and Ecuador. That's an easier one. Where you have Chile, Peru, and Ecuador in the mountains colliding, you find dishes that are very similar. You find ceviches, but in Ecuador they're made with lupini beans called chochos. But you also eat those in Peru. And you also find them in Chile. But once you move into the inner cities, Chilean food starts developing more Germanic, Eastern European flavors. Peruvian starts developing more African, Asian flavors, and so on and so forth. And it's fascinating to see. So in a way, that is what makes Latin American food so different than any other part well, not really that different. Look at Europe. Cuisines are delineated in a way, and if you put two countries together, you'll find similarities, right? But the cuisines are different. So, but in Latin America, what makes it so complicated to disarm, let's say, or to pull apart so that you can see the differences, is all of the conglomerations and the amalgamations of cultures from the world that come together. It's the way they come together, in the amounts that they come together, in the formula that they come together, that creates the different cuisines.
Mm-hmm. Cynthia Graubart has a question.
So I think that begs the question, how much does geography play a role in the cuisines being similar or dissimilar? I understand the cultural and immigration aspects, of cultures that fled and came and settled and brought their foodways, but then you've got a lot of coastline, you've got the mountain ranges, which would be a commonality. What do you think about that?
It's a wonderful question. Y'all, this is a James Beard Award-winning author here, Cynthia Graubart from Atlanta. The fascinating thing about the terroir in Latin America is that it varies greatly, not only within continents and within regions, but within each country. Mm-hmm. So one of the most interesting countries where you see that is Colombia. In Colombia, you find jungle, you find mountains, you find really cold weather, then you find the coast, and you find really hot weather, and the cuisines vary tremendously. In Peru, it's the same thing. The Incas have some of the areas in agriculture that are different. I'm trying to think of the word, and I'm blanking right now. But the microcultures of agriculture that are dissimilar completely, and so you will find that in the north, in the height of the mountains in the Andes, the indigenous people still freeze dry their potatoes and make them into chuño. And you can now buy chuño in the supermarkets here. It's truly the first, what do you call the fake potatoes in them? Instant potatoes. It's the first instant potatoes of history. They're big though, and you just rehydrate it in water. But they were doing that because the weather was so cold, they were able to preserve it that way. They could not do that in the coast. And so that it varies even with that, the microculture of each country. And that's what makes each Latin American country so exciting to study, is that you can find that the same indigenous people in each area were using different ingredients or different methods of cooking because of where they were.
So I'm going to interrupt, sorry, I'm going to pull rank. So the indigenous culture is, slow down. The cuisines of the indigenous cultures, do you feel are still heavily present in South American cuisine?
In all Latin American cuisine, they're still very, very relevant.
Right. Not Spanish, not European, very, like very indigenous, relevant. The original, the first people.
The simplest recipe that I'll give you that you'll recognize, guacamole. Okay, the original word was mole. Mole for the Nahuatl language in Mexico, that area, was mixture. Aguacate came from the word aguacatl, which meant, do you know what it meant? You know what it meant, aguacatl? It means testicles, because of course men name any of this, but that's how they hang from the tree, okay?
They do. Google it.
They do.
Google it, seriously.
And I write that in the book too, because I just think it's fascinating. So guacamole means avocado mixture. I remember about maybe 10 years ago, somebody in the New York Times published a recipe of green pea guacamole, and I was terribly offended. Do you remember? I was terribly offended. I'm like, call it pea mole, but you should not call it guacamole because it's not guacamole if it doesn't have avocado. So if that gives you an idea of how important that was the way that the indigenous people were eating it. Not with lime or lemon because they didn't have citrus, but they had other things that they could use to acidify it. And but they did have the tomatoes and they did have the chiles in some of the countries. And yet you find that, just to show you two dissimilar sauces made with the same ingredients, in Mexico you have guacamole, in Spanish you have in Guatemala you have guacamole, which comes from the Mayan mole instead of mole. and it has only avocado, some onion, and lemon. There's no other additions. There's no cilantro, no tomato, nothing else. And then you go down to Venezuela and you have guasacaca. And guasacaca is a sauce made with avocado and vinegar instead of citrus. And now again you have sweet peppers and tomatoes in it. And 3 different cultures that are based in our indigenous people, because there were so many tribes, so many groups, so many incredible cultures and nations that formed part of Latin America originally. They all represented the same ingredients in different ways, but they're still relevant today. We're still eating guacamole, we're still eating guasacaca with our arepas, we're still eating guacamole in Guatemala.
That's amazing.
She had a question.
One more? Thank you. Thank you for letting me cut in line.
So I'm curious about like healthy diet, because my experience with South American cooking through my family is it's mostly meat and grain and very little, like you mentioned, the collard and the kale and the avocado. Like what else do they do with vegetables?
And talk about fried, because that was another question.
That is my favorite question tonight, and I'll tell you why. I have spent 30 years trying to break the stereotypes that tie Latin cooking together. One of which is everything's fried. 2, everything's unhealthy. 3, everything's spicy.
Sounds like Southern, right?
4,
Except the Southern,
everything's
yeah.
cheese laden, right?
Yeah.
The largest chapter in my book is the vegetable chapter. Yeah, and so you have carrots, you have collards, you have different ways. There's a fabulous cauliflower salad. You know how here in the South you have your broccoli salad with raisins and things, and everybody knows how to make it, and it's delicious. Well, several countries, and that's one of the recipes that says various countries, and I explain well which ones. Chile, Guatemala, Argentina, you'll find that it's a cauliflower with raw cauliflower salad with mayonnaise in it, but it's a light mayonnaise vinaigrette made with, creamy that way, and other ingredients that you let it just macerate, and you eat it, and it's fresh, and it's super trendy. But then you have your basic tomato salads, you have your, trying to think of other interesting, there's a curtido. Curtidos are slaws. Again, something that you would all be familiar with here in the South. But our slaws don't have any mayonnaise or cream in it. So they usually are not used as the side dish, but as a topping to foods that are very heavy in starch or that are fried, like tacos, for instance. But there's one in Guatemala that's made with beets. And so it's a red slaw made with cabbage, beets, peas, and carrots. And it's an amazing salad. It is so exotic, and yet it takes minutes to make. And it's something that people eat there every day. They wouldn't think twice about it. So I love that question, because I think that one of the things that doesn't transfer well when you move to a new country, your family's recipes, you do tend to go back to those comforting things. And if you're from Argentina, Bolivia, Uruguay, that is the center, the meat center of Latin America. That is what you will find. A lot of potatoes in that area too. But when you go down to Brazil, you'll find yuca instead of potatoes. You'll find a lot of dishes with plantains. Did you all know that plantains are African?
Wow.
So they are part of our trinity in Latin American dishes. We have the beans, which are native from the Americas, the rice that were brought by the Spaniards, and the plantains, which are African. So again, the 3 cultures, every single Latin American culture has that trinity. So there is so much to undress here in the world of Latin American cooking that I wish I could have days to explain to you. But the way that the book is made is for you, if you want to cook from it, you can cook from it. It's very simple. The recipes have been tested so many times, not only by me. I had a professional tester, but I also had the cooks that I interviewed test some of these recipes and tell me how close to the ones they are. So they're vetted. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you is that when we shot the photos of this book, it was during the 2 weeks when COVID disappeared. Remember, we had 2-week period when we thought it was over, and then 2 weeks later it started again. And so I had 2 weeks in which to work with my photographer to put as many photos as we could. They only hired us to do 75, but we gave them, they ended up buying the rest. So we have about 150 some photos in the book. How was I going to do all that food by myself? The stylist said she wasn't going to cook. So I had to cook all these dishes, and we had to do 13, 14 photos, and I wanted to include more than one recipe per photo. So I called a friend of mine, whom you know too. She used to be the director of the cooking school in Chapel Hill. And I said, Ellen, would you come and help me cook these recipes so that I at least have another pair of hands there doing it? And she said, yes, don't worry, we'll make it happen. Well, the first day of our photo shoot, she appeared with 8 of our friends from the cooking school.
Aww.
And we all, it was 7, and one of them was a chef who was going stir-not crazy and heard about this and said, can I come? My restaurants are closed, can I come? I need to cook. And between the 9 of us, we created so many recipes, and we tested all these recipes all over again. They had to do exactly what was in the paper, and the recipes were tested again, and they're vetted. So that, for me, is important. I don't want you to fail when you get into the kitchen. I want you to discover new cuisines, but succeed in what you do. The recipes are written in a very simple way, not in a way that will insult my good cooks, but in a way that will hold your hand if you are a new cook. And finally, I would say the book is also written for those of you who don't cook but love to read.
Yay, let's give Miss Sandra a big hand. And thank you to the Atlanta History Center for producing this incredible event. I hope y'all have had a good time tonight.
Thank
so
you
you're going
for
to
having
sign
me
books.
back. I am going to sign
She's going to
books.
sign books.
Yes, we're going to sign in the lobby. There are also lots of copies of the book available, English and Spanish. So we were talking earlier about how great signed books are for Christmas or other holidays that you might celebrate here very, very soon, because it's the end of October. So thank you all. And just a couple of quick announcements. We have a really robust Author Talks series here. You'll see brochures hanging out in the lobby. We hope to see you back again soon. We're also, there's a not new, because it's in its 55th year, isn't that impressive, but new to us being the coordinator for it, a daytime lecture series starting in January called Living Room Learning. It's a wonderful 7-week series. It's put together as a course with some great professors here in Atlanta. It's on Wednesdays during the day. It's just one price for all 7 lectures. It's a really wonderful event. Again, it's been going, this will be its 55th year. It was started by a group of Sweetbriar College alumni 55 years ago. So we're so happy to keep it going here. So we hope to see you here for that. So once again, thank you all. Thank you so much. Let's give Sandra and Virginia another hand, please.
Thank you so much for doing this.
And I cannot wait to get home and start cooking. So we'll meet you out in the lobby for the signing.
And
Thanks,
I hope to see you all on Instagram. All my books have my Instagram thing, so you can follow me.
Yes.
And show me what you're cooking.
Follow, tag, post photos. Everything helps. Thanks, y'all.